Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I'll bring you the next part of the heartbreaking story of the single mother, lythica. As you all know, in the previous episode, a shocking event unfolded. Hung's mother, while being chased by the police, fell into utter despair and even took a child crossing the bridge hostage. In that tense moment, the entire area froze in fear. Hung, both as a police officer and as a son, fell to his knees, begging his mother with a trembling voice. He pleaded with her to let go of her hatred and urged her to surrender so she could receive leniency. But her heart was weighed down with so much resentment that there seemed to be no way out. The way she looked at Hoai was like a raging storm that could never be calmed. And then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, she threw everything aside and leapt into the raging river, like a knife cutting through the silence of the night. Hung's scream echoed across the bridge. The rescue teams immediately launched their search, flashlights scanning the riverbanks, sirens wailing in the distance. But no one knew whether she was still alive. As for Hoai, she stood frozen beside Hung. Her heart felt as if it were being crushed, because deep down, she knew that even if she wasn't the direct cause of this tragedy, in Hung's mother's eyes, she was the thorn that would never be removed. So what will happen next? Will the rescue team be able to find Hung's mother? And after all this tragedy, will Hung and Hoai's relationship have the strength to survive? Stay tuned for today's episode to find out more. Hung collapsed by the edge of the bridge, his bloodshot eyes raging like a furious ocean. He screamed his mother's name, his voice tearing through the silent night, echoing endlessly across the cold, merciless river. But the raging current flowed on, indifferent and unfeeling, swallowing every desperate cry that left his throat. His comrades had to hold him back, their hands gripping his shoulders tightly as his entire body trembled uncontrollably, as if he were about to throw himself into the torrent to chase the faint shadow he believed was his mother. His shoulders shook violently, and his muffled sobs, raw and broken, were enough to silence even the most battle-hardened men around him. At that very moment, the entire reconnaissance force was mobilized. Specialized vehicles screeched to a halt, tires grinding against the wet asphalt. Search dogs were brought in, their noses twitching as they sniffed the damp, river-scented air. Under the blinding glare of floodlights, rescue boats were lowered into the water, their engines roaring to life, shattering the suffocating stillness of the night. Divers from the special forces, clad in pitch-black wetsuits, plunged into the freezing waters, their figures swallowed by the ink-dark depths. They searched meter by meter, scanning every hidden corner, clinging to the faintest hope that they might find even the smallest trace. But there was nothing. The roar of boat engines merged with the relentless slap of waves against the hulls, forming a grim, pounding rhythm of despair. The chief commander barked orders into his radio, his voice hoarse after hours of tension. "Continue sweeping downstream. Not a single spot is to be missed, do you hear me?" Searchlights cut across the surface of the water, their beams sharp like blades, slicing through the oppressive night. Hung stood there, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned bone-white, the blood in his hands seemingly frozen. His hollow gaze followed every returning rescue boat, his eyes empty, aching, and hopeless. No sign. No glimmer of hope. Only a void that threatened to consume him. Behind him, Hoai quietly stepped closer. Her cold hand rested gently on his shoulder. She said nothing. She knew that any words of comfort now would be meaningless. Her trembling shoulders betrayed her fear, but still, she stood there, his only anchor as he hovered on the edge of collapse. Time crawled on. Hours passed. Then the entire night. Dozens of boats continued their relentless search across the river. On the banks, rescue trucks lined up, their flashing red lights blinking like hundreds of watchful eyes in the darkness. No one slept. No one gave up. But every time the divers surfaced, it was only to shake their heads grimly. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in a bleak, lifeless gray, the rescue team was exhausted. Thick morning mist rolled down over the river, cloaking it in an eerie haze, like the smoke of an old battlefield. An emergency briefing was held right there on site. The commander, voice ragged but firm, declared, "Nothing yet, but we are not stopping. Expand the search downstream. I don't care if it takes all day, we keep going." His words struck Hung like a heavy sentence. He no longer screamed. No longer fought. There was only a haunting silence. His hollow eyes stayed fixed on the raging river, as if he could will it to give his mother back. One endless night passed, then another day. And still, nothing. No sign of her. No proof of life or death. Only the merciless current, carrying her, perhaps, to some unknown, unreachable place. After all their exhausting efforts, the reconnaissance team, the mobile police, and the rescue force were forced to temporarily withdraw. The river kept on raging, as if it was hiding a secret that no one could reach. Flashlights gradually went out, and the rescue boats returned to the dock one by one in an unbearable, suffocating silence. No one spoke. No one dared to look into Hung's eyes. The commander, his voice heavy with guilt, finally spoke. "Hung, take a few days off. Regain your strength, then we'll continue the investigation." Those words cut into Hung like an invisible blade. He stood there motionless, his eyes empty. He didn't argue, didn't nod, didn't say a word, he simply turned away. Every step he took felt as if he were walking on the shattered pieces of his own heart. When he returned home, Hung was a shadow of himself. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, and there was an aura of despair around him so heavy that no one dared approach. And in that moment of near collapse, there was only one person he could turn to. Lythica. The old wooden door creaked open. The moment Hoai saw Hung, she froze. He stood there, drained, looking as though he might collapse at any second. Without a word, she stepped forward, gently held his hand, and led him inside. They sat down in the small room, where the dim yellow light cast long, lonely shadows, making the space feel even heavier. Hung said nothing. He just sat there, his hands clasped tightly together, as though he were holding on to the last fragments of his strength. Silently, Hoai poured him a glass of water and placed it in front of him without saying a word. She knew this wasn't the time for questions or consolation. What Hung needed right now wasn't words, it was simply someone who would stay and listen. After a long silence, Hung finally spoke, his voice hoarse and raw, stripped bare by the screams of the previous night. "Mother, she still hasn't been found." His voice broke, and he couldn't go on. Hoai lowered her gaze, her heart twisting painfully in her chest. She could feel every ounce of the anguish in his words. And in that small, quiet house, everything came pouring out. Hung told her everything, how his mother had been cornered, how she had taken a child hostage, and how, in the end, she had thrown herself into the merciless river before his very eyes. His voice trembled, sometimes faltering so much that he had to stop just to catch his breath. Hoai sat silently beside him, her eyes red with tears. There was no anger left in her toward Hung's mother. All that remained was sorrow. Sorrow for a woman driven to the edge of despair. Sorrow for Hung, the son who had been forced to watch it all, powerless to stop any of it. "Maybe, if it weren't for me, none of this would have happened," Hoai whispered, her voice so soft it was almost swallowed by the silence. She sat beside Hung, her heart heavy with guilt. Deep down, waves of self-blame crashed relentlessly inside her. She thought that if she had never appeared in Hung's life, maybe his mother would never have been pushed this far. The thought cut her like an invisible blade. But even so, she knew this was not the time to leave him. Because right now, she was the only anchor he had left. In her heart, she made a silent vow, one born from the strength of a woman who had endured countless wounds, no matter what. I will not let him fall. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do to make it right for him, I will do it. She looked up at Hung. His hollow, exhausted face made her chest ache. Yet even through all that pain, he didn't blame her. Instead, he reached out and held her hand tightly, as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear. Stop blaming yourself, Ca. Hung's voice was rough, but there was a warmth in it that broke her. I've never regretted having you by my side. Those words shattered the dam holding back her tears. Hoai wrapped her arms around him, clinging to him as if she could shield him from the storm consuming his soul. In that moment, she understood his love more deeply than ever, a love without reproach, without resentment, only boundless acceptance. In the quiet of that little room, they stayed there together, two broken souls clinging to each other for what little warmth they could still find. And in the middle of all that despair, there was still one fragile sliver of hope. They didn't say it aloud, but both of them knew it in their hearts. As long as Hung's mother was alive, there was still a chance to begin again. Even if she had to face the law. Even if the road ahead was filled with darkness. As long as she was alive, Hung wouldn't lose everything. As long as she's alive, Hoai whispered, squeezing his hand like a silent prayer for them both. Hung gave a faint nod. In his eyes, there was no anger left for his mother anymore. Only a deep, aching grief, and endless guilt. He blamed himself for not being fast enough, not strong enough to pull her back. If only he'd been a little quicker that night, maybe everything would have been different. But now, all he could do was hope. Hope that the river hadn't claimed her. Hope that somewhere, clinging to the barest thread of life, she was still holding on. Outside the window, the night wind whispered through the leaves, mingling with the silent prayers within that small house. And in that fragile stillness, Hung and Hoai sat hand in hand, knowing that if they let go, they might lose everything. That day, as dawn gently broke and a thin mist still veiled the river, a villager living by the riverbank was casting his net as usual when he suddenly froze. Something was floating in the cold, sluggish current. At first, he thought it was just a piece of driftwood carried away by the water. But as he drew closer, his feet stopped dead in their tracks. His aged eyes widened, and his heart nearly stopped. It wasn't driftwood, it was a body. Terrified, he flung down his net, his trembling hands fumbling for his phone as he called the police. There's a body. Floating on the river, come quickly. Within minutes, the wail of sirens shattered the gloomy silence of the early morning. The investigative team and forensic unit arrived promptly. The riverbank was immediately cordoned off, yellow tape stretched tight, sealing off every path. Curious onlookers gathered at a distance, whispering nervously, but no one dared to step closer. When the body was finally pulled ashore, the atmosphere turned so heavy that no one dared to breathe too loudly. It was the corpse of a woman, adrift for so long that her face had become grotesquely unrecognizable. Water stains and clinging mud made the scene even more ghastly. A few young officers from the forensic team had to turn their faces away, unable to look directly. The team captain frowned deeply, his voice hoarse with tension. Call Hung here immediately. We need confirmation. When Hung received the news, it was as if someone had struck him over the head with a hammer. His entire body wavered, the phone in his hand trembling so violently that Hoai had to grab his arm, afraid he might drop it. The world around him blurred. The bustling sounds of traffic, car horns, voices, all of it was muffled into an oppressive void. In that suffocating silence, the only thing that existed was the pounding of his heart and a desperate, unending prayer, *please, don't let it be her. God, please, don't let it be my mother, *. On the way to the riverbank, Hung drove like a man possessed. Every kilometer felt like a century. His eyes were wide open, not out of focus, but out of fear that if he closed them, he'd see his mother's smiling face from memory, only to open them again and face a cruel reality. Beside him, Hoai remained silent. She simply placed her trembling hand over his, holding on tight, as if her warmth alone could anchor him. To her, Hung looked like a taut string ready to snap. One more shock and he would shatter completely. When they finally arrived, the scene that greeted them stole the air from Hung's lungs. The mist lay heavy over the frigid river. Yellow police tape cut across the landscape. The flashing red and blue lights from police cars reflected on the rippling water, painting an eerie, chilling picture. A small crowd of onlookers stood far back, faces pale with worry and dread, whispering quietly but daring not to approach. The forensic team and criminal investigators stood in a grim line, their faces set in stone. They spoke no words, only exchanged brief glances and solemn nods. The air was so heavy that even the sound of the wind rustling through the riverside trees felt like a mournful lament. Hung stepped out of the car. Each step felt like he was walking on stone. His legs stiff, his body trembling uncontrollably, cold sweat trickled down his spine. He could hear nothing but the pounding of his own heart, loud and chaotic in his chest. A police officer approached, placing a firm hand on his shoulder, his voice low and grave. "Hung, steel yourself. We can't be certain. You're the only one who can identify her." Those words cut into Hung's heart like a blade. He nodded slowly, his throat dry, unable to speak. Before him lay the body bag, motionless on the cold ground. His hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white, his nails biting into his palms. He bent down, drawing in a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength he had left. Hoai came closer. She opened her mouth as if to speak but then thought better of it. Instead, she simply stood behind him, her tearful eyes locked on him, her hand gripping the hem of her sleeve to keep herself from breaking down. Hung knelt down. His hands trembled violently as they reached for the edge of the cold white sheet. Time seemed to freeze. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, then slowly pulled it back. And there it was. His eyes flew open. Fear clamped down on his chest, robbing him of breath. But then, only seconds later, when he realized the deformed face was not his mother's, his shoulders sagged in overwhelming relief. He inhaled sharply, eyes bloodshot, his entire body trembling as though a crushing weight had been lifted off him. Hoai stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, as if afraid he might shatter from the slightest touch. Hung didn't speak. He simply nodded faintly, gratitude swelling in his chest. His mother was still out there. She hadn't been taken from him. Not yet. But even in that relief, there was no peace. Before him lay the body of another nameless woman, a brutal reminder that if his mother wasn't found, one day he might have to face this nightmare all over again. And in that moment, a new prayer burned within him, fiercer than ever. Mother, please, wherever you are, be alive. Even if you must stand trial, even if you're in chains, if you're alive, I'll do whatever it takes. Memories flooded him like a raging river. He saw his mother braving sun and storm, her calloused hands toiling to raise her children. He remembered winter nights when she mended his torn clothes, the days she ate nothing but rice with watered fish sauce just so her children could have more. To him, she wasn't just his mother, she was everything. And at that moment, Hung clenched his fists tight, a determined light burning in his eyes. He knew he could not wait any longer. If his mother was still out there, he would find her. No matter what it took. Even if he had to wade through every inch of that river, plunge into its freezing, skin-slicing depths, or confront the cruelest truth imaginable, he would not stop. The river that night raged violently, as if determined to drag everything down into its cold, dark depths. When Hung's frail mother was swept away in the black water, all she could feel was a freezing pain, like thousands of needles piercing her skin. Water rushed into her mouth and nose, choking her, while her hands flailed helplessly in the current. But just as it seemed everything was over, a dry branch jutting out from the riverbank appeared, like a lifeline thrown from fate itself. In a frantic burst of will, she clung to that branch with every ounce of strength left in her. Her knuckles turned bone white, veins bulging against her skin, but she didn't let go. The wind howled, the water battered her relentlessly, dragging her body back and forth, yet her instinct to survive burned fiercer than ever. Time crawled by, slow and merciless. She didn't know how long she had been clutching that branch, minutes or hours, but to her, it felt like a lifetime. When her hands began to numb, her blurred eyes caught sight of something drifting on the surface, a styrofoam container carried by the current. In that split second between life and death, survival won again. She released the branch and lunged for it, clutching it with trembling arms, holding it as if it were the last lifeline in the world. The river carried her away. She had no idea how many bends she had passed, only the sound of rushing water, the whistling wind, and her own frantic heartbeat pounding in her ears. In that moment, she was no longer a fugitive. She was merely an old, exhausted woman, clinging to a sliver of hope in the darkness, refusing to be swallowed by the void. Then, a sudden wave struck. It hurled her and the makeshift raft against a muddy sandbank near the shore. The impact left her breathless, pain shooting through her body, but she was alive. With trembling legs and numb hands clawing at the wet earth, she dragged herself up, shivering violently like someone who had just escaped death itself. In the pitch-black night, her weary eyes gleamed, not with regret, but with grim determination. She knew she couldn't let herself be caught. She couldn't allow them, Hung, the police, anyone, to find her. Because for her, going back was no salvation, it was a living hell. With stiff fingers, she stripped off her soaked jacket, her hands trembling from the cold. Without hesitation, she tossed it onto the ground. Then, fumbling in her pocket, she pulled out everything she had left, her ID card, a few crumpled bills, the last remnants of her life, and placed them neatly by the riverbank. She knew exactly what she was doing. These would be her final traces, the proof to make the world believe she was dead. She wanted to disappear, completely. The darkness before her stretched endlessly, swallowing everything in silence. The cold wind lashed against her face, carrying the bitter scent of the river behind her. She turned back one last time, gazing at the belongings she had left behind. A tired, bitter smile curved her lips. Then, without a sound, she turned away. Her heavy footsteps sank into the wet mud, carrying her farther and farther into the night until her silhouette vanished into the darkness. Each step tore her heart apart with memories of Hung, of the days when she was still a gentle mother, before hatred and guilt consumed her. But she didn't stop. Not once did she look back. Because she knew, from this moment on, there was only one path left for her, to keep running. ChatGPT said. So, can the police once again trace the footsteps of Hung's mother, the woman who vanished into the darkness, carrying with her all the sins that have yet to be judged? They will not stop, because even the smallest clue could open a new door leading to the truth. The winding paths along the river, the testimonies of the villagers, even the faint traces of mud left behind, all are under the sharp scrutiny of the investigation team. But it's not only the police who are searching. Hung is too. That son, whose heart has been torn apart after everything, still refuses to give up the belief that his mother is alive. He knows that if there is even the slightest chance, he must be the one to find her, before the law binds her in the chains of guilt. And deep within Hung's heart, he still hopes that one day, when faced with everything, she will turn back. And then there's Hoai. She is no longer just a companion, but the only lifeline keeping Hung tethered to this world. She watches him grow thinner by the day, his deep-set eyes carrying the weight of pain and endless sleepless nights. Hoai understands that after all that has happened, she cannot abandon him, she must not leave him. She vows to do anything, no matter the cost, just to see Hung smile again. Yet, could things really be that simple? After coming face to face with death, will Hung's mother change her view of the world? Can she let go of hatred, let go of the past, and open her heart to the woman who stood by her son in his darkest days? Or is what lies ahead nothing but another tragedy, colder, harsher, and far more merciless, when love and hatred collide in a way that cannot be reconciled? Everything remains an unsolved mystery. Stay tuned for the next episodes, where every step, every choice could rewrite the fate of Hung, Hoai, and the mother who vanished into the night.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa mọi người đến với câu chuyện tình yêu của mẹ đơn thân Lý Hoài Ca. Mẹ đơn thân Lý Hoài Ca thì vừa trải qua một quãng thời gian vô cùng nguy hiểm và đau khổ khi mẹ của Hùng là mẹ chồng tương lai của cô và cũng là mẹ của người cô yêu đã tìm đủ mọi cách để đoạt lấy tính mạng của cô nhằm mục đích ngăn cản tình yêu của Hoài Ca và Hùng. Vậy thì liệu mẹ của Hùng có phải trả giá cho cái tội ác của mình hay không? Thì có nha mọi người. Hôm nay khi cảnh sát truy sát đến bà và bà đã nhảy cầu, và sau khi nhảy cầu thì mọi người đã ráo riết tìm kiếm nhưng mà không tìm thấy. Một khoảng thời gian sau thì có một người dân phát hiện một xác chết nữ. Tuy nhiên đấy thì cũng không phải là mẹ của Hùng, và hiện tại mẹ của Hùng đã an toàn và đang tiếp tục trong quá trình lẩn trốn. Tuy nhiên bà vẫn mang nỗi uất hận rất nhiều đối với Hoài Ca. Thì liệu bà sẽ làm gì tiếp theo? Mời mọi người đón xem ở tập mai nha.